Hello, my name's Stuart. I'm the curator of the Cromwell Museum in Huntingdon. And it's a great pleasure to be back with you again. It's the first time we've done one of these videos in a little while. We've taken a couple of months off from doing videos from our YouTube channel, largely because we've actually been so busy with visitors during the summer months, which has been a great problem to have. Over the next few weeks, we'll be restarting this program properly and having a whole series of interesting videos on different aspects of life in the 17th century. Stories, of course, relating to the life and times of Oliver Cromwell, who, of course, is the focus of the museum. And it's our job to try and tell, warts and all, the story of this hugely significant but also very controversial figure. So we're going to be having videos looking at different aspects of his life, about objects in the museum's collections, discussions with historians and so on. So keep your eyes out over the next few weeks for an interesting programme of talks we've got coming up. Today, though, for our sort of return video, if you like, I'm going to do something which is quite personal to us in the fact that it's this week, the beginning of October. In fact, this week I'm just recording this on the 18th of October 2022, and this week is our 60th anniversary. So we're celebrating our birthday tomorrow on the 19th of October. The museum was first opened to the public on the 19th of October 1962. So just to talk through briefly a little bit about how the museum came about. Why have a museum on one specific historic individual, and such a small museum as well, and yet also one with such a rich collection? Well, the museum itself was originally the sort of inspiration of one particular man, Dr. Edward Poley, who was the person who sort of really was the sort of driving force behind the creation of the museum in the early 1960s. In the Victorian period, there was a huge amount of interest in Oliver Cromwell. Of course, the publication in 1845 of Thomas Carlyle's Letters and Speeches propelled Cromwell forward in the public imagination and really kind of turned him into a sort of Victorian hero. In the late 19th century, during the era, of course, which there was a fashion for putting up statues of famous individuals, a number were erected around the country of Oliver Cromwell. Most famously, of course, the very controversial statue of him outside the Houses of Parliament. At this time, there was a suggestion that there should be a statue of him erected here in Cambridgeshire, the county of his birth. Now, Huntingdon, his hometown, might have seen the obvious place to put that, but actually the town had no interest in it happening here. In actual fact, at that time, Huntingdon was rather embarrassed by Cromwell, as I say. The reason being was that most people around here were very high church, and therefore arguably more sympathetic looking back to the cause of King Charles I than they were to Oliver Cromwell and Parliament. On the other hand, St Ives, just down the road from us, where Cromwell moved to after leaving Huntingdon in 1631, was very nonconformist, and therefore very sympathetic towards Cromwell's religious views. Of course, appropriate given the fact that this almost certainly where he developed his very strong Puritan beliefs. And as a result of which, that's why a statue was erected to Cromwell in the centre of St Ives that still stands today and was put up in 1901. In the 1940s, Hinchinbrook House, which stands on the outskirts of Huntingdon, formerly the home of the Earls of Sandwich, and as it was at that time, and originally built by the Cromwell family, was first opened to the public. And at that time, a small exhibition was created there of items relating to Cromwell. In 1958 was the 300th anniversary of Cromwell's death, and as a result of which it was decided finally that Huntingdon should do something to commemorate the reputation of its most famous son. Accordingly, here in Huntingdon Town Hall, where I'm sitting at the moment, in the assembly room upstairs, a special exhibition was arranged, and objects were brought in from Hinchinbrook, from other local collections, borrowed from descendants of Oliver Cromwell himself, and also from national collections, including some remarkable artefacts that just boggles the mind to allow us to imagine that they were allowed here to Huntingdon. Nowadays, you can imagine there would have been top security and millions of pounds worth of insurance to be able to put this sort of exhibition on. But duly it was created, and in July 1958, for 3 weeks only, an exhibition was held here in the centre of Huntingdon. It proved to be immensely popular. At one point, the exhibition, in fact, overall throughout its run, it was getting an average of over 100 visitors an hour. So for a small space in the centre of a small market town in Cambridgeshire, that was astonishing. And it generated the feeling that there should be, or that there was, a huge amount of interest in Cromwell and his life and times, and therefore the suggestion was put forward that a permanent museum should be created. The driver behind this, as I say, was Dr. Edward Poley. Poley was a member of the Archives Committee for what was then Huntingdonshire County Council. So he was somebody who had a great deal of interest in history. He was had a bit of an academic background, although at the time he held a day job of being the educational advisor to the local Borstal prison, so the prison for young men that was in just outside Huntingdon. And Poley basically campaigned for the creation of a Cromwell Museum on the basis of the exhibition that had been held here in 1958. At that time, the building, which had formerly been Cromwell's grammar school, had been acquired by the town council, and it was kind of fallen vacant at that time. And given the sort of historic connections with Cromwell, it seemed to be an obvious sort of place in order to house the museum. Duly, the county council, supported by money from the Pilgrim Trust, created the museum, and it was opened to the public on the 19th of October 1962. The museum was first opened to the public, incidentally, in the week that saw the Beatles have their first performance on television and Granada TV, I believe. And it was also the week, weirdly enough, of the Cuban Missile Crisis as well. So it was obviously a lot going on in the news. Not that that feels like today, of course. And so it was opened by Sir Harry Hilton Foster, who was the then Speaker of the House of Commons, and the local newspaper describing the occasion and the new museum displays as being very dignified and appropriate. The museum's collections have expanded over the years. They were a very small collection originally, partly composed of items from local collections, including the stuff, as I say, from Hinchinbrook House, but also, of course, items that were loaned to the museum by the Bush family, who were Cromwell's immediate descendants, who still very kindly loaned many of the most precious items in the museum's collections to us today. Dr. Poley continued to be the curator of the museum until his death in 1968. The sort of oversight of the museum was then taken on by a guy called Brian Wormold, who was a Cambridge academic who was an expert on the early modern period, and he sort of oversaw the museum's operations really until in 1974, when, under the sort of change in local government in the area, Huntingdonshire County Council was dissolved and the running of the museum taken on by the expanded Cambridgeshire County Council. For a long time, it was really kind of run within the sort of libraries and archives service. So the museum sort of didn't develop quite as much as perhaps other museums might have done. It's worth pointing out that, of course, back in those days, museums were very different today. They were sort of quiet, sedate places of academic study. Only a few people were allowed into the museum at any one time, and there were very strict regulations. So no boys, for example, who were known to have been to the local Borstal or known to have misbehaved on a regular basis would have been allowed inside. During the 1980s, the museum was curated by its first professional curator, John Goldsmith. John still keeps his association with the museum today. He ran it for over 25 years until his retirement in 2014. Today he's the chair of the Cromwell Association. And John professionalised the museum and hugely expanded its collections, actively collecting and making it into what it is, I suppose, today in many respects. He was also behind the commemorations that took place in 1999 for the 400th anniversary of Cromwell's birth in the town, which attracted tens of thousands of visitors to Huntingdon. So the museum continued to develop. There was a couple of small refurbishments over the years. Unfortunately, in 2014, it was announced by Cambridgeshire County Council that there was a likelihood of the museum having to close due to austerity budget cuts. And at the time, it looked as though the Cromwell Museum might disappear altogether. However, a local protest campaign put together by local people, as well as many outside academics, historians and interested people from across the country, caused something of a rethink. And as a result of which the museum was saved, albeit now to be run by the Cromwell Museum Trust, an independent charity who now run it today. So today the museum is operated, as I say, by an independent charity with some support from the town council who own the building. I took over as curator in 2018, We have today 2 members of staff and an amazing team of about 30 volunteers, without whom the museum simply wouldn't be able to operate. And we deserve huge thanks for making sure that we've been able to survive over the last few years. We underwent a major refurbishment, of course. The end of 2019 had a grand reopening on the 1st of March 2020, when the Sealed Knot marched through the town and the museum's patron, Sir John Major, came and reopened it for us, only to have to close 2 weeks later when, of course, a small matter of COVID-19 came along and the world kind of imploded. Today, the museum's hopefully going from strength to strength. We've just had our busiest summer on record for 10 years, which is great. And we're now celebrating, as I say, our 60th birthday and looking forward to the future. We're working with our friends and colleagues in local authorities and with various academics and with the local community to explore the possibility of hopefully expanding the museum over the next few years to give it this breathing space to tell the hugely impactful and important story of the mid-17th century within an expanded building, which will hopefully also attract many more visitors to Huntingdon and be a boost to the local economy as well. It means also we can put many more of the treasures that we've got in our collections on display, which are currently in store. And hopefully, as I say, if you've not been to see the museum before, you'll take the opportunity to come and visit us. We're also launching, to help us try and achieve this, our 60th anniversary appeal. So we're hoping to do various projects over the next year or so, including digitising the museum's collections. And so we're doing various fundraising schemes to help us with this. So we very much welcome, as always, as an independent charity, your donations and your support. Thank you very much, folks, and hope to see you again soon.